There are bodies inside this aircraft that haven't been touched in over 60 years, 5 men, still strapped into their seats, frozen exactly where they died, and no one even knew they were up there. I've spent 15 years pulling wrecked planes out of mountains, deserts, and ocean floors. I've seen what war leaves behind, but nothing prepared me for what we found in the Hardangervidda plateau in 2003, a German Heinkel He 111 bomber, completely intact, crew still inside. It had been sitting there since April 1940, buried under snow and ice, waiting for someone to find it. This isn't just a story about a missing plane. This is about 5 young men who flew into a storm and never came back, and how their families spent 6 decades not knowing what happened to them. April 27, 1940. Norway is 3 weeks into the Nazi invasion. German forces are pushing north, trying to secure strategic locations before the Allies can respond. The Luftwaffe is flying constant missions, reconnaissance, bombing runs, transport. The weather is brutal. Spring storms roll through the mountains without warning. Visibility drops to nothing in minutes, and these crews are flying with maps that barely show the terrain accurately. Heinkel He 111 bombers are the workhorses of the Luftwaffe at this point in the war. Twin-engine medium bombers, crew of 5. They're reliable aircraft, but they're not designed for the kind of weather Norway throws at you. The mission that day was routine on paper. A reconnaissance flight over the Hardangervidda region, check for Allied movements, report back simple. Except nothing about flying over those mountains in April is simple. The crew takes off from their base in Denmark. Radio contact is normal for the first hour. Then the weather closes in. Heavy clouds. Snow winds strong enough to throw the aircraft around. The pilot radios that they're experiencing mechanical issues, icing on the wings, engine trouble. They're trying to climb above the storm. That's the last transmission anyone receives from them. After that, silence. The plane disappears. No distress signal. No crash site reported. Just gone. For the next 63 years, that aircraft is listed as missing. The Luftwaffe has hundreds of missing planes by the end of the war, so this one doesn't stand out. The families of the 5 crew members receive the standard notification, missing in action, presumed dead. But there's no closure, no bodies, no wreckage, nothing to bury, just questions that never get answered. The Hardangervidda Plateau is one of the most remote regions in Norway. It's Europe's largest mountain plateau, over 3,000 square miles of barren, rocky terrain. In winter, it's completely inhospitable. Temperatures drop to 30 below zero. Snowdrifts pile up 20 feet high. Even in summer, the weather can turn deadly in hours. If a plane went down up there in 1940, finding it would be almost impossible. The Germans didn't have the resources to send search teams into those mountains during the war. And after the war, no one was particularly motivated to go looking for downed Luftwaffe aircraft. So the Heinkel sits there, year after year, decade after decade. Snow buries it deeper each winter. Ice forms around the fuselage. The wreckage becomes part of the landscape. Glaciers shift. Rivers of ice move slowly across the plateau, carrying debris with them. The plane gets pushed, tilted, compressed under tons of snow, but it doesn't break apart. The cold preserves everything. Metal doesn't rust at those temperatures, fabric doesn't rot, and bodies don't decay. By the 1990s, something starts happening in the high mountains of Europe. Glaciers are melting. Climate change is exposing things that have been buried for decades. Hikers start finding artifacts from World War II. Ammunition, equipment, occasionally human remains. It's not uncommon in the Alps or the Scandinavian ranges. These mountains swallowed a lot of history. In August 2003, 2 Norwegian hikers are crossing the Hardangervidda Plateau. They're experienced. They know the terrain. But even they don't expect what they stumble across at around 7,000 feet elevation, a massive piece of wreckage sticking out of a snowfield. At first, they think it might be from a more recent crash, a small civilian aircraft maybe, but as they get closer, they realize what they're looking at. The distinctive shape of a Heinkel He 111. The nose cone is partially exposed, so is one of the wings, and the aircraft is clearly from World War II. They take photos, mark the GPS coordinates, and when they get back to civilization, they contact the authorities. Within weeks, a recovery team is assembled. I get the call in September. By then, I'd already worked on a dozen crash sites across Norway and Sweden. But this one is different. The location is extremely remote. The wreckage is embedded in ice, and there's a strong possibility that the crew is still inside. We fly in by helicopter with a small team, archaeologists, military historians, a forensic specialist. The Norwegian government wants this done properly. These men deserve to be recovered with dignity, even if they were fighting for the wrong side. War is war, but death is death. When we reach the site, the scale of it hits you immediately. This isn't a scattered debris field. The plane is largely intact. The fuselage is bent and crushed in places, but it's all there. Both engines are still attached to the wings. The tail section is twisted but recognizable. You can still see the Luftwaffe markings. The black cross is the swastika on the tail, faded but visible after all these years. We start by clearing snow away from the fuselage. It takes hours. The ice is thick and hard. We use hand tools because we can't risk damaging anything inside. As we work, we start to piece together what happened. There are no signs of fire, no explosion damage. This wasn't shot down. The aircraft came down in a controlled descent. The pilot was trying to land it, or at least trying to keep it level as long as possible. The impact was severe but not catastrophic. The belly of the plane hit first, then the nose crumpled as it plowed into the snow. The wings probably sheared off some of the forward momentum, but the crew compartment stayed mostly intact. That's why the bodies are still inside. We cut through the side of the fuselage carefully. The metal is brittle from decades of freezing and thawing. Inside, the air is stale and cold. Everything is covered in a layer of frost. And then we see them. 5 men, still in their seats, still wearing their flight suits and gear frozen solid. The pilot is slumped forward against the controls. The co-pilot is beside him, head tilted back. In the nose section, the bombardier is crouched in his position. The 2 gunners are in the rear compartment. All of them are exactly where they were when the plane hit the ground. There's no sign of panic. No indication they tried to evacuate. They probably died on impact, or very shortly after from the cold. Their faces are preserved. You can see their features clearly. One of them looks incredibly young, probably not even 20 years old. Another has a wedding ring on his hand. These weren't faceless soldiers. They were real people. Sons, maybe husbands, maybe fathers. And they've been up here alone for 63 years. We spend 3 days at the site. Every piece of wreckage is documented. Every item inside the aircraft is cataloged. We find personal effects, letters, photographs, a pocket watch. One of the crew members had a small Bible in his jacket. Another had a lucky charm, a tiny metal horse. These small things hit harder than the wreckage itself. The bodies are removed carefully and transported down the mountain. The Norwegian military takes custody of the remains. Forensic teams work to identify each crew member using dental records and Luftwaffe personnel files. Within months, all 5 men have names again. Families are notified. Some of them had been waiting their entire lives for this news. Children who grew up without fathers finally know what happened. The youngest crew member was 19 years old when he died. The oldest was 32. They were all from different parts of Germany, thrown together by war, and they died together in a frozen wasteland thousands of miles from home. The plane itself is partially recovered. The nose section is removed and eventually placed in a Norwegian aviation museum. The rest is left where it fell. The cost and difficulty of recovering the entire aircraft from that location is too high, and in some ways it feels right to leave it there, a memorial on the mountain. Standing at that crash site changed how I think about my work. I've pulled apart dozens of wrecks. I've cataloged thousands of pieces of twisted metal, but this one reminded me that every aircraft I examined had people inside it. Every wreck has a story, and every story ended with someone not coming home. The Heinkel He 11-1 that vanished in April 1940 isn't missing anymore. The 5 men who flew it aren't lost. They've been found, they've been identified, and they've been laid to rest. 63 years is a long time to wait, but at least their families got answers. At least there's closure now. War leaves scars that last generations. Sometimes those scars are hidden under snow and ice. Sometimes they sit undisturbed for decades, but eventually the mountains give up their secrets. Eventually, the ice melts. And eventually, we find what was lost. The Hardangervidda plateau is still littered with wreckage from World War II. There are more planes up there, more bodies, more stories waiting to be uncovered. And as the climate continues to change, more of them will surface. Each one will need to be treated with the same care and respect. Because beneath all the politics and propaganda and historical analysis, war is personal. It's about individual human beings who never made it home. If this story got to you, hit subscribe because there's a lot more buried history we need to talk about.